talking about Daniel Hale, the heroic whistleblower. Now, maybe if you meet Daniel Hale, don't lead like that because he seems to, have some confliction about what he did, before leaking the documents that eventually, blew up the Obama drone program and helped to expose that, his administration was acting as judge, jury, and executioner, and oftentimes killing civilians, not just the intended targets of the strikes. And Hill, went beyond just being a whistleblower and leaking documents, but has, since provided a lot of commentary on the drone program, including in the great documentary National Bird, which me and Will Porter actually talked about in one of our first episodes, first time I interviewed him on Foreign Policy Focus, my old podcast. So, Daniel Hale is an incredibly important figure. Me and Will certainly feel like his role in the drone program, leaking that, and then appearing in National Bird helped us to understand how nefarious this program is, how much it hurts the people overseas, but also the American soldiers who are involved in it. So there's a couple articles I'm talking about here. One is titled "Call Me a Traitor." It's by Carrie Howell and Howley, and in the New York Magazine. And so I have that up right now on the screen. There's also a letter that Daniel Hale wrote to the judge before his sentencing that I'm going to reference some here, and that was published at the Gray Zone and the Dissenter. The Dissenter's Kevin Gostola's great website. So just kind of getting into the story of who Daniel Hale is. He talks about growing up and struggling with his very religious father. After high school, he tried a few different things. Went to New York, tried to sell magazines, went to Las Vegas and tried to become a dealer. I think he was from kind of the Appalachia area, so I'm sure, these places were all quite exotic and different to him. But everywhere he went, he seemed to fail and end up back at home. It seemed like one of the messages that his father really imparted in Hale was that one of the ways to have some success, get some status, make some money, not be a failure, for somebody who comes from Daniel Hale's family, where it doesn't seem like there's a lot of money there, it would be to join the military. And so eventually, at the age of 21, he ends up in the Air Force. For all the things in this article to talk about, essentially everything else that Daniel Hale has tried, it seems like he's kind of failed at, and I'm not trying to insult the guy or anything, but he's been fired as a dishwasher, failed out of school, stuff like that. But he did apparently ace his test, to enlist in the army, and really had his pick at what he wanted to do. And at the time, he talked about being somebody who watched Democracy Now, kind of believing in the Obama message. This is about 2008. We're talking about that he's joining the Air Force. And, by 2010, he comes to realize that Obama is a clown and a fraud, he says. But back then, believing that this is the guy that's going to shut down Guantanamo Bay, not, what he ends up doing, keeping Guantanamo Bay open and waging this massive drone war across the entire Middle East, North Africa, and Central Asia. So, yeah. Anyways, Hale is in the military. One of the things he does is signed up to learn Chinese, and in, I believe, 2012 is when he ends up getting first deployed to Fort Bragg for some classes, and worked with JSOC there. And then, there he talks about the first thing they learned about was cell phones. And then he gets deployed to Afghanistan in 2012, where he is working on it seems like the tech end and the input end of the drone program going on there, where they're talking about tracing cell phones and using those cell phones to blow up targets. He talks about that it's not his job necessarily to be there when the missile blows up, right? Like he wasn't necessarily supposed to see that, but apparently he did. And he has some, particular stories that if you read either his letter or this article in New York Magazine, you'll understand, that he was scarred by what he saw during this experience. Now, after he gets out of the military, I guess this is probably around like end of 2012, 2013, he ends up with an opportunity or excuse me, no, this is he gets out of the military in 2013, and in 2013 he sees Jeremy Scahill in April, and then speeds alongside him in June of 2013, and that, that's where they get in contact, I guess. After leaving the Air Force, he tries a couple of different things, and it doesn't work out. So he needs work, he needs money, he wants to go back to school, and in 2014, he gets a offer to work at, I think it's Leadis. It's a Pentagon contractor that apparently assigned him to the National Geospatial Intel Agency. I think the NGA is the acronym. It's actually one of the biggest, kind of Pentagon Washington agencies that exist. They're looking to map everything. And so while there, he was, I guess, mapping a whole bunch of things that he said were already publicly available on Google Earth. But he got hired to do that and was making pretty good money. He had some moral issues with the job, making the money through the Pentagon. And so one of the things he promised himself in the beginning is that he would only do this for a few months. Now, in February of 2014, some of his workers, I guess, get him to start accessing and watching what you would call war porn, different drone strikes and stuff like that, where people die. Of course, I think his coworkers are people who kind of cheered on, rah rah, America's blowing up the bad guys. This is the kind of stuff that we get to watch because we're special and have clearance. Where Hale is, I think, more scarred by this and traumatized by it. And so he ends up on February 8th, 2014, starting to print documents and then contacts Jeremy Scahill. And this continued through August, where he smuggled documents out of this agency, which is an intelligence agency and did have tight security. Apparently, Hale had to be, or could have been searched several times. And so what he was doing is he was, I guess, like printing the documents out and then putting them in his belt line and using that to get out. Now, the other thing he did is he actually smuggled the documents back in, and I guess that made him feel more secure that the government wouldn't necessarily be looking for him or something like that, if the documents were turning back up and being shredded as they should be. So again, this goes on for several months, and the Intercept, in July, the Intercept started to publish documents that were involved, that Hale leaked, and with the drone papers coming out in October of that year. Now, on August 8th of 2014, Hale leaves his job at the contractor and ends up, leaving his job then at the National Geospatial Intel Agency. And when he did, he goes home, and the cops show up at the place where he's living. I guess it's like a friend of his mother lives in like a mansion. She has an extra room. He's living there. I'm not even sure if the guy is paying rent, but he's probably quiet. He keeps to himself. And then the feds come and they absolutely tear her place apart. They question her. She's absolutely devastated and confused. I guess because it's national security, he really can't tell the woman what's going on. He feels embarrassed, so he leaves. And then he goes and talks to a lawyer, finds out there's not an existing indictment against him. And from that time in 2014, I believe all the way until May of 2019, Hale doesn't have any more contact with the police, despite the drone papers being published, him appearing in the Great National Bird documentary, several other whistleblowers going to jail during this time, but Hale doesn't end up in jail. So then it isn't until May of 2019. And in the meantime, I guess, other than appearing in National Bird, Hale had mostly worked as a dishwasher in Nashville. This is, just interesting, the New York Magazine part. He really struggled as a dishwasher. He got fired from everywhere he worked at. And it wasn't because, he was showing up drunk or not showing up for a shift, but rather he would show up, encourage his employees out to look to unionize, as push people to ask for more money, things that management didn't want. But also, I could see fellow coworkers not necessarily responding well to, well, you get a raise. Like some people don't want to be pushed. And so um, maybe not the best social skills. He also would apparently like come into work sometimes and like try to repair things that either didn't need to be repaired, or the company wants to repair. They don't want the dishwasher to come in with his own tools and repair the dishwashing machine. They're going to call their contractor that's going to come in and do it, because he's licensed or whatever like that. So Hale ends up getting fired from just about everywhere he's ever worked, and that continues until May of 2019, when he's fired from his job. He goes, I guess, ends up having drunk sets with a woman, and then returns home, and in the early hours, probably still a little bit drunk, he gets picked up by six feds, completely armed. They came out like a SWAT team from the bushes, it sounds like, and even the feds probably realized that was a little bit of overkill, according to Hale's narrative. And he gets charged with violation of the Espionage Act, and in March 2020 pleads guilty to several counts. I guess kind of on the idea that if he pleads guilty, he would be able to get a reduced sentence. Now he did plead guilty, but then the government sought, I believe, 11 years for him in prison anyways, which would have been one of the more extreme convictions under the Espionage Act. So after Hale pled guilty in April of, I believe, 2021, but it may have been 2020. I think it was 21, though. His bail was revoked because his psychiatrist told his parole officer that he was worried that Hale could be a danger to himself or others. And so at the ultimate betrayal of a doctor, Hale was then subject to go to prison, which I'm sure only exacerbated any mental health problems that he had. And then just today, July 27th, the day before this runs, Hale was sentenced to 45 months in prison. I believe he does get time served under that, so I'm not exactly sure how many days that he's wrapped up so far, but it's 3 years and 9 months. Maybe it gets down to about 3 years with time served, maybe quite a bit less than that, again depending on how much of this time he's been in prison. And then of course, hopefully, knock a couple months off. Daniel Hale doesn't seem like the kind of guy that's going to get into, any kind of definitely physical trouble in prison. Maybe he'll try to, organize some kind of prison and food strike or something like that, and end up having to do the whole sentence because of some kind of activism like that. But that is, I think, the general outline of the story of Daniel Hale. A couple other things I thought were interesting about his story is that while the Army or the Air Force, I guess, trained him in Chinese, it wasn't even something he used until he worked for the defense contractor. And so that seemed like it would have been a big waste of money on the government's part. He also said that, I believe in 2010, an officer came into wherever he was at the time, maybe Fort Meade, and told them that they couldn't look up the name WikiLeaks, and that doing so would result in them potentially losing their security clearances. A couple other interesting notes. There's a great thread by Kevin Gustola that he put together on his Twitter, K Gustola, where he points out kind of the story of Daniel Hale he gets into. But one of the things that was really disturbing is that the prosecution alleged that the documents that Hale put out, that Hale exposed, were used by ISIS to gain some kind of advantage, and that this should factor into the sentencing. Now, I'm not sure if the judge actually bought this. I don't know. Again, the government was looking for quite a bit more time than Hale got, so maybe not. But it's not that ISIS actually benefited from this. And in fact, Harry Cooper, a former CIA executive, expert for classification, who trained top officials, disputed the claim that ISIS gained some kind of advantage. An adversary who has gained tactical advantage by receiving secret information would never publicize their possession of it, because the government said that ISIS publicized that they got one of these documents, that was their point. And so that was pretty clearly debunked. One of the disturbing things about this is that Hale was allowed to be under the threat of being arrested at any time for years and years, but wasn't prosecuted throughout the Obama years for this, which is the administration that this seemingly would have embarrassed more, and that wasn't prosecuted until we got into the Trump administration. But it was the Biden administration that has continued with this and gone ahead with the sentencing. Biden could have pardoned Hale. His Department of Justice could have recommended a lighter sentence, not the strictest ever espionage sentence, and instead went the strict route on this one. So just this isn't a Trump thing, it's not a Biden thing, it's not an Obama thing. This is the US state at its absolute worst. And again, I really recommend people check out the letter that Daniel Hale wrote. I think you'll get more insight than I gave into his personality and how he really feels about the US military, having to have been a part of the military machine, this awful drug program that has killed so many people, and also somebody who I think suffers from moral injury. You'll get to see maybe a little bit of that, which I think is useful, and just how awful the drone program is. If you're not interested in reading, it is the New York Magazine write-up and his letter are quite long. Check out National Bird. At least you'll get to see some of Daniel Hale in that. And again, one important figure that Daniel Hale is, he really is a hero and should be let out of jail. And we should really be focused on imprisoning our, war criminals like Cheney and Bush and stuff like that.